What's going on? Matt Savoca here from Awesemo.com, and we are here on the Awesemo Best Ball channel, and we are talking about tools and tips for volume drafters with awesome tournaments like the Ball Mania 3 tournament that Underdog launched this month. This is becoming an issue, a specific issue for more and more fantasy football players who are making that jump over to the best ball scene, but not only just drafting one team in a tournament, but drafting multiple teams, maybe dozens of teams in a single tournament. And that suddenly creates more issues, not necessarily issues, but more strategies we can employ here. And I'm really excited to dig into this one with my buddy, Nick Lepri. Follow him on Twitter at notorious_FNTSY, Notorious Fantasy. As you know, I'm at Draftaholic over there as well. Nick, how you doing today, bud?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm very excited to talk about all that has to do with today's video. This is going to be very interesting because, like you said, a lot of people that are getting into this, maybe they just play in like 2 fantasy leagues, and this is going to be the first time that they're really ramping up and trying to understand how to diversify your rosters, because I think that's important to regular fantasy football, but it is even more important here when we're talking about best ball.
Yeah, I mean, people have talked about diversification if they have 2 office leagues or 2 leagues that they really care about in the offseason. But when you get into the best ball streets, diversification is necessary when you
Yes.
do more of these drafts. You know, maybe you're used to, I don't want to overgeneralize here, maybe you're used to loading up your favorite expert consensus rankings on draft day, just going off the board, taking the best value available, employing a strategy or two like late round quarterback and calling it a day. That is not something you can do and expect to be a winner over time in best ball. Simple as that. And especially when we're talking about tournament play, roster diversification is something that we really, really need to dig into, because there are 3 ways that people generally look at fantasy value going into the offseason. They make projections, of course. They stat out players and what they expect them to do. They make rankings so that they employ some sort of ceiling and floor based adjustments to those projections. And then they group ranked players into tiers. So we got projections, we got rankings, and we got tiers. Do you have a favorite of those 3 when we talk about best ball drafting? Because I actually certainly do.
Yeah. Now, my biggest tip in drafting would be to be using tiers. I think that, at least for me personally, I find tiers to be the most helpful because you can really see when there's a fall off at a given position. For example, if there is just 2 receivers left in your given tier and there's like 6 running backs left, then you probably want to go ahead and draft that wide receiver because it tells you that there's going to be a value drop off there. And then maybe by the next time you are up to pick, that running back could be there. I've been using a tiered drafting system in fantasy football and best ball for the last couple of years, and I found that my teams have been a lot more successful when using the tiered system. It is nothing new. It's nothing super crazy to even figure out or understand how to use, but to me, it is very important.
I think I would agree with you in one regard. It is the most valuable. It is the most valuable of the 3. Tiers help you in a way that rankings can't really help you, because
Yeah.
the distance between rank number 1 and rank number 2, what is that distance? What is that in terms of projections? We can literally stat out the difference between running back 1 and running back 2, but
Yeah.
there's a ton of uncertainty. We're in the middle of May and we're trying to project what these players are going to be doing at the end of December. But tiers help you identify drop-offs in talent, drop-offs in ceiling and floor, and drop-offs in median projections. So what I actually do in my offseason is I stat out my players, I create projections, and then I use those projections. I actually do something, it's tough, but I round all those projections up. And so I get rid of all those fancy decimal points. And so I use that to create obvious tiers. And then, based on how I feel about floor and ceiling, I move players up or down into specific tiers. And then from there, I'm drafting from those groups, and I don't really care per se which ones from those groups I get to. In fact, I am going to let my overarching draft strategy, and I'm going to let my team and division strategy, which we'll get into in a minute, actually supersede the players in this situation. Do you have anything to say about roster diversification and tiers before we move on to what I was talking about with team and game stacks?
Yeah, so when it comes to what you're talking about tiers, I completely agree with what you're saying because when you group the players together, it almost takes away that bias for saying, "Oh, I dislike this player because you have them in the same tier. So it almost takes your bias that you might have against a certain player or for a certain player away when you're using a tiered system. And it really helps you just see the draft at a whole nother level when you're looking at a draft in a tiered system. And it makes you make the best pick in terms of value basically every single time. Tiers is, in my opinion, the most important thing in drafting in fantasy football and in best ball. And that's why most people you see nowadays when they release rankings, there are tiers in them.
Exactly. Exactly. You got to get them into groups. And it may feel fundamental for those who've been hearing this term tiers for years and years, but it's actually more important in best ball because it will
Yeah.
naturally help diversify your rosters. Now let's go into roster diversification 201, we can say. And that's using team stacks and game stacks to help you diversify your rosters as well. The way the draft board is made up for you in most of these drafts is what first round pick did you get? And that happens a minute before the draft. You decide you decide to enter a draft and suddenly you have the 106 or the 109 or the 101. And so you're kind of just going off you're going with ADP, but you're just going off your projections for those first two picks. Then it gets really, really interesting because not only do you have your tier based system in play, but everyone knows at this point that you got to stack up your teams. Do you have any favorite stacks? Are you just basically going off of DFS where you're using quarterback and wide receiver one or quarterback and tight end one? Or do you have any specific stacks that you really look to try to grab in these best ball tournaments?
Yeah, it really just depends on how the draft falls, in my opinion. There are a couple of stacks that I think are a little bit easier to get compared to other stacks. For instance, the Chargers stack, the Chiefs stack is very difficult to get. If you're trying to get, say, Juju Smith Schuster, Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelsey, in a lot of drafts, that is almost impossible to do. Same thing with the Chargers. Getting a guy like Herbert, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams on the same team is going to be very difficult. But then there are other stacks that I really do like. For instance, Tom Brady, Gronk, Godwin and Evans. Gronk, because a lot of people are kind of worried, oh, is he going to play or not? We've talked about this before. He goes very late, so it's easy to secure a stack like that. And then I'm mostly trying to get the stacks that I know I can get. I know for sure I can easily get a giant stack in a lot of drafts, and I think that Daniel Jones could potentially make a huge leap this season. Will he? I don't know, but I do know that that's an easy stack that I can get. Same thing with the Jets. I'm not
Wow.
the biggest fan of the Jets as a whole. But I think in terms of fantasy, getting Zach Wilson super late in the draft, it is kind of easy to pair him with his wide receivers. So basically, any stack that I can get, I'm not just going into the draft thinking, I need the Charger stack, I need this stack. I'm more just looking to see how the draft falls to me. And then in terms of game stacking, the only thing I'm looking at, I'm not looking at anything besides week 16 and 17, like you wrote down on the run sheet. It is basically impossible to just go ahead and do, oh, I need to stack for week 6. That makes no sense. Just stack for the end. If your team somehow makes it all that way towards the championship game, if you're able to have that crazy stack like last year, having the Bengals go up against the Kansas City Chiefs, something like that can easily win you the whole tournament.
Right. So you talked about a few great points there because differentiating your lineups and differentiating your rosters are important in best ball drafts. But did you hear how important Nick was talking about his team stacks, how invaluable they were? In fact, he was looking at off the wall teams like the Giants or the Jets. And you know what? If he has those stacks and those players go off in certain weeks where other teams do not have those stacks, that's how he differentiates his team. Now, there are some divisions and some teams where I can feel pretty confident that they're going to be playing in a lot of shootouts. I bet you could guess them. The AFC North, the AFC West, which is probably the most talented division top to bottom I've ever really seen in my time covering football. And like you said, teams that are advantageously scheduled in weeks 16 and 17. I've talked to you a little bit on the Best Ball channel about how I value usable weeks, the ability to be a roster available player in a best ball draft because we need those usable weeks when we draft in the offseason. There are some really interesting teams that have some value in drafts as well. Minnesota is a team that I'm trying to stack up. Green Bay is a team I'm trying to stack up. Those two teams meet in that 16-17 window. Las Vegas, another team that doesn't have the highest ADP, but think about who they're going against every single week. Mahomes, Herbert, Russell Wilson, and the Denver Broncos. These are teams where we know the obvious stack, and Las Vegas is really interesting too because we have some really, really strong secondary options. Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow had advantageous ADPs to me, so you don't need to pay top price. But don't think that means we're saying stay away from the Chiefs, stay away from the Chargers. If you've ever seen our top stacks tool on the Awesemo DFS tool, it's hilarious how often it's the Chiefs, the Bills, the Buccaneers, or one of those other top teams, depending on buys. It doesn't really change all that often. So paying up for top teams is mightily important. And the last thing I'll say is keep the divisions of your teams in mind. Like if you draft a running back from the AFC North, like Najee Harris in the first round, it actually makes me more likely to draft a quarterback like Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow, right? Because that is the type of game stacks that win in DFS. You get a quarterback wide receiver stack on the other side, a bell cow running back, and that's the core of a league winning roster. So we can't know what's going to happen in week 16 or 17, but we can set up our teams in advantageous ways. So actually what will happen when we talk about draft tiers, I'll start to move up within the tier all the teams and divisions that I'm looking for. I have a tool that I'll just highlight the player on my computer. If you're a pen and paper guy, just make sure to circle them within the tier. But I'm looking for team stacks, game stacks, and division stacks to help me diversify within a tier as well. Any last thoughts on that before we dig into our final thought here?
Yeah, something I think that's kind of important to note. A lot of people try to look at strength of schedule, like you're looking at a game in week 16. Say you're not stacking the team against each other. I'm not looking at, oh, this team is playing up against this defense that I think is shit in May. I don't think that's necessarily the smartest move to make because defenses change all the time. The defense isn't going to be the same as last year. By week 16, half the defense might be in the hospital. So you really never know. So I'm not looking to just put so much emphasis
Just
on,
at the
oh,
Chargers, why don't you? Just at them.
yeah, exactly. But by like week 16, I'm not just like, oh man, I'm so excited for this defensive matchup because the defense could be drastically better or just terrible compared to what you thought they were going to be. And I think that's something that a lot of people key in on, which I personally do not do.
That's a good call. I want to add one caveat, which is we rarely, and not never, but rarely see a defense go from bottom five, bottom eight, worst in the league, to top eight, best in the
Yeah.
league in one season. We do see teams at the top revert to average or maybe even slightly below average. And we do see teams revert from the basement to average. But a worst to first situation, overall defenses, that's very rare. Usually knock it out of the park in the draft. We'll see, but just keep that in mind. And we've been talking about this site all day long already, but we should mention that Underdog Fantasy is the sponsor of this video, and Underdog's current contest, the Best Ball Mania 3, $10 million in available prizes, is the coolest best ball tournament I have ever seen. $2 million going to first place, $1 million going to second place, $1 million to the regular season points champion as well. Only $25 to enter, and it's the opportunity to play for multiple chances to win millions of dollars in one tournament. It's simply too good to pass up. Even better, you can use the promo code Awesemo to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100 and use that to enter this contest. And if you choose to do so, use the tools on the Awesemo best ball side of things. Getting ramped up here this spring. We're going to have a draft package. We're going to have expert consensus rankings, Nick's rankings, my rankings, Gajeski's rankings, and of course, Alex Baker's $1 million winning projections as well. Those are already up for free for a limited time on the website as well. Underdog Fantasy, use promo code Awesemo for that $100 first match deposit bonus. We move on to the last bit of strategic talk when it comes to roster diversification. And this is really up to interpretation. And so I'm really excited to hear your opinion on this, Nick, because drafting with a plan is hard when you're talking about drafting multiple rosters because you don't know how each draft is going to work out. And sometimes, how dare we don't know exactly how many times we are going to enter that tournament. I personally don't know the exact number I'm going to eventually have allocated for the Best Ball Mania tournament this year, but Having a plan of action based on the number of entries or a ballpark number of entries you're going to have, I think is very, very important. And I want to talk about something that I have here listed as being strategically overweight. And it kind of goes back to that conversation we were talking about on the top stacks tool. We can get creative and create these Detroit Lions stacks with Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they may win us a week or two. We can get creative and go Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson and Zach Wilson and Brees Hall and get all the green jerseys we can. But at the end of the day, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs are going to win someone money. Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert are going to win someone money. Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are going to win the people money. So I'm actually planning and trying to be strategically overweight on certain teams and certain players and certain divisions that we mentioned in the second segment there. That means I am being aggressive with my ADP for those players. And that may be uncomfortable for some players who are basing most of their draft picks on value or even
Yeah.
projection based value. I'm actually overweighting the teams and game environments I want to be involved with more so than the projections. Now I'm using projections to guide me. In fact, I have a tab on my own rankings page that says math-based tiers, so that when I create my tiers, I am trying to create a statistical baseline, a reality baseline before I go off and try to add my put my thumb on the model, if you will. But I want to be overweight on Tom Brady and his two main wide receiver pass catchers this year. I want to be overweight on the Kelsey Mahomes stack. I want to be overweight on the Chargers players. And that means I'm going to have to pay up. I'm comfortable doing that. Are you comfortable joining me, Nick?
Yeah, I also would be very comfortable doing that. If you're looking to draft on a value based standpoint, that's where you're going to end up with the stacks, like I talked about at the beginning, where you're sitting there with Daniel Jones, Kenny Galladay, Kadarius Toney, and you know what? Maybe that does work out. Maybe this team does become excellent, but I'm not doing that every single draft. There is one team that I have really keyed in on in all of my drafts thus far, and that is the Buccaneers. I love Tom Brady. I love this stack. I really think that this could be the winning stack at the end of the season. So I'm trying to get all of them. And based upon where their ADP is sitting, it is very easy to do so. And same thing goes with some other teams like the Chargers. While it may be a little bit more difficult, if you do reach correctly, you can do it. The hardest one to get by far has to be the Chiefs, like you mentioned, because in some drafts, Patrick Mahomes, they don't even end up drafting any other players from the team, but someone just is bound to be like, you know what, Pat Mahomes is great, and they draft them in the second round. And then you're sitting there very annoyed if you drafted Travis Kelce early, but you got to be able to maneuver in the drafts. But at the end of the day, I do want to be overweight to these teams that I believe are going to be very good, as well as some of the teams that may have not been very good last year that I think could make that leap up. Like I'm a Dolphins fan, but I have a lot of Tua, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle, even though you got to pay up a pretty solid price for Hill and Waddle.
Yeah, and you know what? Both of those players could go off, and Tua could have a career year. And honestly, this is something we should mention. The most valuable stack is a stack that is not the most expensive. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
The most valuable stack in 2022 is one of these mid-tier wide receiver quarterback combos that is going to emerge from this group, this clump in the center, and be obviously valuable. We knew it was Stafford and Cup last year. Both were mid-tier in terms of
Yeah.
their own place in drafts last year, emerge as some of the most valuable plays in fantasy we've ever seen. We don't know who that's going to be. Could be the Dolphins. But if you want security in your stacks, there's an easy way to do that. So I think we broke that down pretty well. I also want to mention that this is called Tools and Tips for Volume Drafters. I've been using a sheet. I believe the guy's name is Michael Dubner. He works for RotoViz, and you can follow his stuff at Dubner_Michael. He's got a best ball tracker sheet, and you could definitely believe we got our eyes on some stuff we could make over at Awesemo. But this is a great tool if you are volume drafting, so that you can enter your rosters, see where your exposures are a little bit more granular than places like Underdog help you. And if you play on multiple sites like Underdog and DraftKings, which has some pretty good contests as well right now, then this will help you keep track of it all and see your overall exposures, which is super helpful for players like us who are starting to play a whole lot, even in May. Do you have any other tips, any tools, any last words as we get out of here in this strategy video for this week?
Yeah, like you said, I think it is even more important to have a tracking sheet when you're playing on every single website, right? Underdog's the sponsor of today's video. I play a lot on Underdog, but I'm also going to be on other websites as well doing the drafts because the ADPs are a little different. You can do different things on different websites, and you can also do different things in different contests. And it's a much easier to see because if you use a tracking sheet like this, you can see how your exposure looks when you're comparing everything together. So if you did a best ball but super flex draft and rookies and sophomores, all this, you can kind of combine it together and it's a lot easier to see in my book. And then the only other thing that we didn't actually, or we might have mentioned a little bit, is that schedule rotation sheet that you have down here at the bottom of the run sheet, looking at the schedule table where you can see
Oh,
where
yeah.
these teams are playing in division, out of division, the 17th game, who they're going to be playing against. These are things that could help you out a ton when trying to figure out what stacks you really like, trying to figure out which team may be ascending potentially, but they have a much easier schedule because of where they finished last year, and vice versa. A team like the Chiefs has a very hard schedule, which might be a negative for you or maybe a positive because you think this is going to be high scoring games when they play up against the Bills, when they play up against teams like the Bucks.
Yeah, a couple things. I want to throw that sheet into the show notes. We're gonna throw a link to that sheet there so that you can get your hands on it. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that. This is something that if you're coming from a poker background and you know those tables you got to memorize, this is sort of where I think you could go for your next level of memorization if you really, really want to go that route. And that's memorizing the opponents of the stacks that you're going for, because then you're going to be game stacking opponents. And
Yeah.
while that sounds complicated to do in a fast draft where you only have 30 seconds per pick, I'm just telling you what people who you're up against are doing. And people who are you're up against know when they go for, say, a Bills stack, that means that the Bills are also going against the AFC North. So, Najee and Stephon Diggs look like a very, very interesting first, second round combo if you get it, because you're going to have a game stack at some point. Or you could get players on the Ravens, Browns, or Bengals. They are going to be stacked up against your Bills stack in this theoretical case multiple
Yeah.
times. So this is a way to think about getting multiple game stacks without having to memorize the entire NFL schedule. This is the shortcut you can use. And we'll see if we can throw a table of this in the show notes as well. Yeah, great point there. And honestly, it's not that you have to do that, not by any stretch. That doesn't mean we're going to win more money than anyone else. It's just a way of thinking that people in these drafts who are volume drafters are already thinking. We want to
Yeah.
expose you to that as well. Any last thoughts before we get out of here, Nick?
Yeah, my last closing thought would have to be that this thought of exposure that not everyone has comes from a strong DFS background. So if you've been playing DFS for a while, this is something that should come easy to you. Whereas if you're someone who maybe just plays fantasy football with Jim from The Office or whatever, then maybe you don't understand this as well. So if you guys have any questions in the comments, please let us know. I'll answer all the comments. I love talking to you guys in the comment section. And because it's very hard to in a 25-minute video really explain everything. So if we missed any points, please make sure you ask in the comment section.
In fact, yeah, leave a comment below. Let's hear what you have to say. We love the strategy talk, and maybe we'll talk about some of the finer points that we hear in a future best ball strategy video. Nick, this has been super fun. Love digging into this stuff. Love digging into this drafts. We will be back with a Mania Monday draft next Monday. Excited for that. This has been great. Follow him on Twitter at notorious_FNTSY. That's Notorious Fantasy. I am at Draftaholic. Until next time, we'll see you later.